All righty, well, welcome everyone to our last app prep session of spring quarter. We do have future app prep related events in the summer and fall. However, this is the last one that's technically a part of our series. So welcome. We're going to get started with the Kahoot session, and then we're going to jump into our PowerPoint. Okie dokie. So our first question, spring quarter 2025. Alrighty, everyone should submit their application on the first day to be considered early. True or false? That is false. We really encourage let's balance earliness and readiness. And that might be a myth that you encounter frequently, that you have to submit the first day or the first week to be early. That's simply not true. We have a lot of data that supports that. And just that friendly reminder, the written application, super important to spend time revising that with HPA as you're getting ready before you hit submit. Alrighty, we'll see how long the scoreboard lasts. Next question. True or false? Applying within 4 to 6 weeks of the application opening, typically June or early July for most apps, is considered early. This is also a true statement. And again, just going back to that myth, we're still going to be okay if you don't submit it in that first day or that first week. And I know that that can be really scary. Next question. Application verification typically takes 5 to 10 days or 4 to 6 weeks. Also true. We're going to talk a little bit more about this during the PowerPoint because there are going to be some variances based on health field and also what month you're applying in. But this is just for us to get a solid foundation of that admissions process together. This is a quiz, multi-select. What components are needed to submit your primary application? Transcripts, letters of rec upload, letters of rec information, or personal statement / experiences. Little tricky. I got a couple of you, but most of you did really well. So transcript and transcript entry definitely a requirement. You do need your letter writer information and you need your personal statement and experiences. That's all going into your primary application. You'd really want to have those done, / you definitely, need to have it done, especially for the transcripts. But you don't actually need your letters of rec uploaded in order to submit your primary application. You will need it for the later stage of the application. Any questions on that? And of course, if you have questions along the way, again, I'm still monitoring chat, so it's not a problem. You're not going to throw me off my groove or anything like that. Alrighty, looks like that one did have a bit of a shift in the scoreboard, and Avantika has a streak going on. Alrighty, true or false? Most schools require secondary / supplemental essays, which will take additional time and typically another fee. Also a true statement. We want to account for that time and, of course, the finances. Are you ready to do both of those things? The primary application does have a fair amount of writing, including the personal statement, experiences, and some additional primary essays or little sections along the way. But secondaries tends to be even more writing. So later on, we'll talk about some submission strategies to help cope with that. True or false? I don't have to submit all of my schools at once. I can submit more schools during and after verification. This is true. There is a slight caveat to it, but we'll get to that in just a moment. But this is going to be a part of the submission strategy that we'll talk about later to maximize your time. Looks like Avantika and Deborah staying on top, and Deborah now has that streak. Congratulations. True or false? fee assistance programs may have rules on when to submit and how many schools in your first batch of submissions. This is true. So for AMCAS, if you do have fee assistance, great. You get up to 20 schools to submit to, and you can add those schools throughout time within that fee assistance time frame of eligibility. But for other application systems, there might be additional rules. For example, AdSAS, if you qualify for the fee assistance, they have a date in mind for this year. So just being mindful of that, of when you have to submit. And it's only up to the first 3 schools that you get that fee assistance for, and you do have to submit all 3 within that time frame or that batch in order to qualify for that. So just being mindful of what are the eligibility rules and requirements and those things. I want you to get the most out of eligibility, get as much money as you can in this, decently expensive process. Next question. For competitive fields, HPA encourages all applicants to apply to all of the California programs/schools. That is actually false. I'm sure a lot of folks want to stay in California. I get it. Especially if you've been undergrad here or you've spent most of your life here. We have a lot of good things going for California. And applying to health professional schools can be quite competitive. So of course, we're trying to maximize our number of schools that you're applying to. However, just something to be aware of, California schools can still have some regional preferences or preferences for directly serving the communities or populations that they have. They might also have additional requirements. For example, a letter of rec from a faith-based leader because they might be a faith-based institution. Other California schools, you might want to just double check or look into what does financial aid look like at their school. So I completely understand wanting to stay in California, and I do still encourage doing some due diligence and making sure you would still be a good fit for their program or it makes sense for your future in your education. Every school is a good school, otherwise it wouldn't be allowed to be a school, but a better question to ask, is it going to be a good school for you? Alrighty, didn't really shake up the scoreboard too much, but now I see Will with an answer streak. Congrats, Will. Next question. Which components are not required for a complete application, aka typically needed to move on to be reviewed by admissions? Ooh, looks like I got some folks. So all of these are typically going to be required in order to go through a review or otherwise known as having a complete application. So we do want to be mindful of when are you going to have your test score. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later because I want to give it the time that it deserves. The Casper/AAMC preview, that might be a requirement for the schools that you're applying to. And so definitely want to double check their website to see if they say anything about it because they just might expect you to do it or they might give you an invitation. So, this is where reading definitely going to be super important. You do need to have your letters of rec submitted or uploaded in order to typically reach that next stage. So this is the stage where letters are going to be super important. Typically they're going to have that supplemental/fee requirement. So that's also usually a requirement to move on. I know that was a bit of a trip up for some folks. Any follow-up thoughts or questions on that? Debatable for the Casper AMC preview. Yes, maybe I should say if it's required by that school, but at that point, I know I already have some long questions in there, but I definitely see the debate. Maybe I'll just stick it into another question for next time. Anything else? Alrighty, going on to the next question. It looks like it didn't even change the scoreboard too much, so that didn't have too much of an impact on things. Next question. When will MD applicants get most of their secondaries? Before submitting their primary, after verification, and upon submitting schools, after verification and primaries. Ooh, bit of a tricky one. So most allopathic medical schools send secondaries to all applicants after they've been verified. There are select schools that do screening first. That's common for the UCs or the California public schools, but most allopathic med schools actually just send it to all applicants. So that's definitely going to be some important information to know, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that relates to the strategy we're going to recommend later. Next question, true or false? Most secondaries for DO and other apps except MD are embedded in the primary application and are needed to submit for that school. This is true. This will also play a role in the submission strategy that we'll chat about later as well. True or false? Schools can give as little as a few days' notice for an in-person or virtual interview. This is definitely true. And this will go into some planning of what we encourage after you do secondaries. After secondaries, we're going to recommend definitely still take a break. You've done a lot of that point, and we want to gear up and prepare for interviews so that way you can be ready for that last minute interview, as well as some other steps after submitting your secondary. True or false? Some schools accept interest/update emails after a complete application. This is also true. We're going to go over some examples. So after you submit your primary, after you submit your secondaries, we definitely want you to stay in contact, not only with schools, but also HPA. That way we can keep going through the cycle together. Of course, that's usually when we don't see each other as frequently, so we don't expect you to see us as much, but we want to still be able to be there to support you along the way in case anything does come up or if you have questions or to give those friendly reminders about sending out these emails. Alrighty, so how HPA can help you. So our next few questions are going to relate to HPA or some other things that we're up to. True or false? You can include that you attended HPA events like the summer pre-med, dental, vet, or PA boot camps in your application. I didn't even get to finish reading the question because y'all already had the answer. This is true. Of course, if you've attended a lot of pre-med, pre-health events, that could just be good to clump them together into one experience in your application as an effort to show your dedication or showing that you've been set on this path and your persistence for it. And usually we have some other things to share in that 600 or 700 characters that you get, depending on which application you're submitting for. Not too much of a change of the scoreboard, but do want to recognize Connor with that answer streak there. But it looks like there was actually a little bit of a change, so let's see how these last few questions go. Alrighty, this year's pre-health conference will be October 11th, 18th, or November 1st and November 8th. It is going to be October 18th. We hope to see you there. It is going to be in person at UC Davis. Sometimes applicants say, why should I go? Either before I apply or while I'm in the cycle. So to break it up into the two scenarios, before you apply, this is going to be a great opportunity to meet one-on-one with admissions folks who typically go year after year if they're able to. This is an opportunity to build up those relationships, shop for schools or explore them, and to continue relationships over time because again, they typically go go year to year. So that's the first half of the day during the exhibitors fair. The second half is still going to be an opportunity to explore the field more, get to know practicing health professionals, current health professional students, etc. And I think the more that applicants go to these types of sessions, they're able to better articulate what are their goals or what do they envision for their future. They could also be opportunities to learn more about the schools that these folks attended, or again, further opportunities like shadowing, etc. So that's why I really encourage going as often as you can, if possible, every year. And why we encourage applicants to go is because this is really your opportunity as an applicant to, final step or final time to put a face to your name. Many health professional schools, including medical schools, receive several thousand applications. So how can we help you stand out in this process by creating a school list that is strategic and also helping you stand out in the secondary or interview stage as you can bring up attending the conference or when you send out those update emails. I really can't stress enough how good of an opportunity going to conference can be. Every cycle, we have applicants that go. They have really great positive interactions with admissions, and then Monday, they're getting interview invites, or they're able to, again, reference this in update emails and get interviews into the cycle as well. So it's a really great opportunity. I would note that every year we also meet folks who fly in to this event from across the country, like Florida and Connecticut, because they don't have these opportunities where they are. And this is an event at UC Davis, hosted by UC Davis. HPA oversees the event and it's led by our student leadership team. So it's also, everyone is invited, UC Davis and non-UC Davis students and college graduates, but it is, keeping at heart, the Davis folks as well. Schools that are attending want to meet you, all the attendees that are joining. So I really can't emphasize enough the opportunity that it is. Registration is open. UC Davis folks do get a discount, whether you're a student or an alumni. Um, and in my experience, the earlier an attendee registers, usually the better prepared they are because it is the largest pre-health event in the nation. We see up to 3,000 plus registered attendees. There's 200 plus exhibitors and there's 70 plus workshops across the 3 hours. So it is a lot. There's a lot going on, and to better prepare, I usually encourage how can you be preparing over time versus the night before, staying up late trying to figure out what's going on. Happy to answer any questions you might have. For any current students, so if you're going to be a student with us in the fall, we are going to do an additional recruitment for our ambassador position where they commit to a certain number of hours the day of conference and the week of leading up to it. And if they, say what they're going to do, if they go to their shifts, etc., they're able to attend the rest of conference for free because they volunteered for their shifts. Alrighty, next question. True or false? HPA's App Prep program has recordings from the winter and spring quarter sessions. This is definitely true. We should have over 10 recordings now. So every topic related to the application process, whether we're still figuring out that personal statement or your timeline, etc. Every topic is covered in an extensive video recording, so I definitely encourage that as a really great resource. True or false, alumni, UC Davis alumni can subscribe to HPA's email with a non-UC Davis email. This is true, and we welcome and encourage all UC Davis students and alumni to be on our email newsletter. And again, even after you graduate, we still want to support you every step of the way. We're going to continue to do some more applicant-related events into the summer and fall. Even though it's not technically a part of App Prep, we do separate sessions for those. Alrighty, alumni can have access to HPA services and advising only up to a year, only up to 5 years, or yes, all alumni no matter when you graduated. This is very true. We're very fortunate to have this policy. So, you know, HPA and UC Davis is investing in you and your future, and we look forward to seeing you um, throughout our services. And that leads to our last question. True or false, you can meet with HPA to discuss your personal statement or other application components during the 15-minute scheduled drop-ins. This is true. Sometimes folks think, oh, it's only 15 minutes. I couldn't possibly fit that in. I would encourage, you'd be surprised how much we can get done in a drop-in. Also, the more drop-ins you go, that time really adds up. For example, if you're even able to go to 2 sessions of drop-ins, that's already 30 minutes together. So how can we see each other frequently and as many times, as possible there? Alrighty, so thank you for doing our Kahoot, answering these questions. And third place goes to Connor, second place to Will, and first place goes to, I think it's Avantika. Yeah. So if you'd like to pick up your prize from HPA, please take a screenshot right now and then send it to me over email. I'll put my email in the chat. And then that way we can give our front desk a heads up. And then we can coordinate when you're going to pick up your prize. Okay. Well, y'all did pretty good on the Kahoot, so great job for either attending at prep program or doing some really good research there. I'm going to pivot over to the PowerPoint for today. Okay. So thank you again for joining us for our final App Prep program workshop in our series. We're going to take a deeper dive into some of the topics that we discussed in the Kahoot. But congratulations to the almost, class of 2025. You still have access to everything HPA does. Just don't forget to stay connected with our email newsletter, and don't forget your student ID, and you're really going to be good to go. Just a quick shout out to our drop-ins there. It's 15 minutes. You schedule it the morning of. So we have drop-ins Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Starting at 8 a.m., you can schedule a 15-minute slot within the time frame or window that we're offering drop-ins for that day. We know that it's a pretty busy time of year, so we definitely still appreciate that patience. So that's why if you can schedule a 30-minute session, great. And in the meantime, can we also be connecting more frequently at drop-ins? Um, as we can see, of course, and as you already know, there's a lot going on in the application process, and we're really juggling priorities here. At the top, I do still list your health, your physical and mental health. You're the most important in all of this. And how can we, treat this as a marathon and not a sprint? And so I really encourage prioritizing you in all of this and taking the time that you need to succeed, whether that is this cycle or a future cycle. Um, After that, I definitely encourage considering, well, what do you need to submit for your primary application for verification? Because that's going to be the next step, right? So while I love it in May when folks are asking about secondaries, I fully support that. Just being mindful of, well, how are we doing with your primary, right? How is that personal statement looking, experiences, or even your school list, etc. Because those are the things that's, that next step or that next stage that's preventing you from moving forward is submitting your primary. So how are those things going? And of course, if you have extra time after working on those things, definitely take a look at those secondaries, but just being mindful of the stages in this process. After you work on your primary, what do you need to have a complete application in order to be reviewed? I do encourage that, there's a lot going on in this process, and this tends to be a pretty stressful time of year for a lot of folks. So I do encourage focusing on what you do have control over and be aware of digging yourself into a rabbit hole and how can we stay, above ground. So definitely encourage focusing on what you do have control over and how you spend your time and energy. If you do have a concern, definitely feel free to write it down so that it's not weighing you down, or you're forcing your brain to have to remember it, go ahead and write it down and bring it into your next HPA session, and we'll see how we can help, how we could address it, or is it even worth addressing? Is this even something we need to be worrying about or not? But in my experience, applicants tend to have a lot of questions, and we're always super happy to address them and also figure out what can we do within the time now and when you would hit submit or when you'll have a complete application. We do also encourage applying when you feel confident and ready. Most schools have a white coat ceremony, and that's a great thing to look forward to. And, think big picture, right? It's a matter of when you get to health professional school, not if. We do encourage applicants to double check schools' websites directly to ensure that they're meeting eligibility requirements. Because at the primary and secondary application stages, in general, there's nothing really preventing an applicant from submitting if they are missing requirements. The one exception would be schools that do pre-screening for secondaries. They may or may not check for eligibility requirements, but in general, the onus is going to be on the applicant and making sure that, they're good to go there. And so again, definitely encourage applying when you feel the most ready. Health professional schools are waiting for you to apply when you are. So in order to submit your primary application, these are the different things that you're going to need. The only portion that the centralized application systems are verifying is the transcript slash transcript entry portion. And I know that can be a little bit confusing, so I always like to clarify what verification is actually doing, and that's what's taking so long. In order to have a complete application slash review, you do need to have your primary application verified, a standardized exam if that is required, situational judgment test again if that is required, letters of rec submitted slash uploaded, the secondary slash supplemental fee, and of course the writing. You should receive a confirmation email once you do have a complete application or see a change in the centralized application system. If you notice it's been a little bit and you don't see a change, could definitely be worth reaching out to the school. That way, maybe you missed something and you're gonna have a chance to turn that in. Or maybe they made a boo-boo and you're just highlighting to them and you help move things along for your application. Alrighty, so a question for you all, and we kind of answered it already, so I'm actually going to skip it, but I'll still ask, which is more important, being earlier or being more ready? Example, with more revisions for the application submission. We do generally encourage readiness, still super important, and sometimes earliness is a little more prioritized. But it is a bit of a trick question. The chat is right. They're both important. And I think readiness, the scale is tipped a little bit over to their side, but we do want to encourage balancing both. So let's submit early and ready as much as possible. The written application can make a really big difference between being invited to interview versus sitting in the wait pile. Right. And we're trying to, create a narrative or a strong theme in your application to show your readiness for this next stage and being a medical student, dental student, etc. And we want to, if possible, make their job easier for them to say yes or invite for interview. I'm going to share a common application experience, and this might be a little shocking for some folks. It is specific to our pre-med folks just because they typically apply to the most schools. Other health professional schools look a little different. So if you are, of course, applying to other health professional schools, definitely have the conversation one-on-one with a pre-health advisor at HPA. But in general, for the pre-med experience, if they're applying from UC Davis or they, attended UC Davis, on average, they do apply to both MD and DO. They typically apply to about 30 total schools. Most schools send secondaries to everybody. So on average, you're probably going to get about 27 secondaries back total. And then from here, there tends to be quite a big drop off. So the average applicant typically receives maybe 3 or so interviews. And in general, the average applicant, if they are accepted, gets about 1 acceptance. The trickle down effect, pretty strong, right? Pretty steep. And that can be pretty scary. And so we do encourage, how can we be as strategic in this process as possible? And from what we've seen, creating a strong school list can really make a difference to increase the number of interviews that you get and ultimately the number of acceptances as well. Of course, those numbers are also coming from a variety of different experiences, a variety of different situations. So it can be really hard to generalize. But just overall, I think it's also showing this process can be quite different than applying to like undergrad, for example. So jumping into the general submission strategy. So this is fair game for everybody. I'm going to go into MD and then other applications in just a moment. In general, you can submit with one school to be verified to start that verification process. You generally don't need to submit all the schools at once. There is an exception, which I'll talk about in a moment. And so you can add batches of schools over time to stagger secondaries that you receive or do. Of course, if you are receiving fee assistance from ADSAS or other non-allopathic applications, again, there might be a requirement to submit your designated number of schools first in that first batch, so 3 for dental schools. There might also be some requirements on when you have to submit it. So just being mindful again of what does the fee assistance program entail for the application system that you're applying into. So, understanding MD admissions or the admissions process, all secondaries are sent after submission / verification. Most secondaries are sent to all applicants, whether they meet eligibility criteria or not, right? That's up to the school, but usually if they're sending it to everyone, they're not checking that. Some schools do pre-screen based on the primary application. This is really common for the UCs to do so, and the applicant would go for another review after they submit their secondary, so that for the schools that do that pre-screening, they can check for eligibility or for certain things that they're looking for, but again, that still might not be a requirement. They may not check everything, so you definitely still want to double check and make sure you're meeting requirements. Um, for MD specifically, the general strategy we encourage is how do we maximize the verification window with pre-writing, and how do we send schools after verification in batches and not just all 20 or all 30 schools at once, which would be a lot of writing. I also want to recognize the AMCAS submission starts today. And again, with our earlier conversation, let's balance earliness and readiness as much as possible. June, all of June and early July, we're still going to have an early application. So we do encourage to complete secondaries / having a complete application by August or September or even sooner if possible. You can submit with one school to be verified. You don't need to submit all schools at once. You can add batches of about 5 to 7 over time to stagger receiving secondaries after the verification window. And then we want to aim to submit within 1 to 2 weeks of receiving those secondaries. As applicants work on secondary, submissions tend to go a lot quicker as they have more practice and you have more content to recycle at that time. In general, because our pre-med folks are submitting so many schools, this could, here's a few approaches for submission strategies. I encourage there's not like one that's inherently better. It's whatever makes more sense for your brain or whichever one helps keep you more motivated to keep the ball rolling. And I've also known sometimes applicants kind of mix it where maybe they prefer approach 1 and sometimes they sneak in some approach 2 things. So it's really, again, whatever makes more sense for you. Approach 1 tends to be a little easier for our brains. Approach 2 requires a little bit more logistical planning with usually more spreadsheets or more documents and things like that. But when we're applying to a large number of schools, it's going to be easier the better we can track things. So we do want to keep track of when are you submitting for schools, when did you get the secondary, do they say anything about a deadline, etc., etc. I'm gonna pause there. Any questions about the MD submission strategy? Got a question in the chat. I will address it at the end. Just be mindful of time. Happy to answer it, of course. Understanding DO and all other admissions, most secondaries are actually embedded in the primary application. So in order to submit to that school, you need to have that portion done in order to submit to them. Um, for that reason, most secondaries are sent to all applicants, again, whether they meet eligibility requirements or not. Sometimes they do pre-screen the primary and they send a secondary invite later, or you have to check the website for procedures and you still do it yourself. In general, if they are doing some form of pre-screening, they are typically going to do another review after the secondary. So again, just speaking to every school's process can be a little different. The strategy for DO and all other admissions, we encourage submitting your primary application with schools that have minimal to no secondary writing. That way we can use the verification window to write more. For both MD, Andio, and all other application systems for everything, the verification window is going to happen no matter what. So how do we use that time to the best of our ability to be able to write more? I'm going to have another slide here. Note that the verification window typically is 4 to 6 weeks. However, this does vary by field and month. For ADSAS in June, still 4 to 6 weeks. That doesn't really change for dental schools. But for AACOMAS or osteopathic medical schools, actually in June, it's typically at most 2 days. So super fast. And I think that can just be really helpful to know as you're trying to plan out what does your summer look like or what does your plan for submission look like. Um, we do encourage, again, let's maximize this time with secondary pre-writing or just writing in general if it's for the DO and ADSAS or other health professions. This can be time to take the extra tests like Casper, Kira, AAMC Preview, etc. You could be attending events hosted by schools, the health professional associations, and HPA, and also find more schools to apply to / solidify that school list with research. It's actually really common for folks to continue to do research into that time period and really not finalize it until June or July or so. I'm just answering a quick question. Okay. So again, secondaries, they're a marathon for being a part of completing your application. So definitely take breaks, pace yourself, because it can be a lot. And we want to set you up for success over a long period of time versus a quick sprint. We do have that secondaries video on our YouTube channel. You can really easily research common questions. Schools often reuse questions, and for the schools that, like DO and dental, etc., they embed it in the application. So once submissions open, which is now for most schools, you can actually see it right now. Alrighty, jumping into some school list considerations. If you're still thinking about how to explore schools, three really great resources are Spring Break Road Trip. So this is for medicine specifically, but you can take a look at the calendar from this past year, see what schools came. They came to it because they want to meet you, right? So schools attending any of these events, they're taking the time to meet with our students. Pre-health conference open to all health professions. So you can, if you go to the attendees tab, go to our, oh my gosh, I just forgot the name, the program from last year and download it and see. We also have our pre-vet, pre-dental, pre-med, and this year pre-nursing boot camps where we'll typically have at least one admissions panel to go to. So we do really encourage researching schools strategically. This can really help increase the number of interviews received, and also really help you save time and energy for when you do secondaries and prepare for interviews. I notice a really big difference in the applicants who do spend the time doing this work up front versus the folks that save it for later. And of course, we do have a YouTube video dedicated to that. Like I mentioned earlier, we still want to communicate with schools. This is a strategy for mostly out-of-state schools. As in California, most California schools know California applicants want to stay in California. So really, it's an opportunity to show out-of-state schools, hey, I didn't just apply to you as a plan B. I am really and genuinely interested in you for XYZ reasons. After your application is complete, we encourage sending every 4 to 6 weeks to schools that accept communications. So you do want to double check their website, the communications that they send you when they verify you have a complete application or when you're meeting them at events like our boot camps. If you have a specific admissions person email, that can be really helpful to email them or at least CC them. The goal is to be brief and concise and save content for future emails. And typically, the first one to be sent is right after you attend pre-health conference, because it's in October. That's usually a nice time. And of course, if you don't see them at conference or if you're not able to go, just in general in October. Um, I think I have a couple of examples here. So this is an example of an update email, super short and sweet. And it's really an opportunity to say, hey, I'm still interested in interviewing you if you could give me that opportunity. If you think you would be available for a last minute interview, like within a couple of days, whether that's an in-person or virtual interview, I do encourage including that in the update email because what happens is people get sick, right? They cancel, or maybe they ended up getting an interview for their top school, or later in the cycle, they've been accepted to the top school, so they withdraw their application. And admissions folks are going to have to fill those seats. So that definitely happens. And we want to be ready. And so sending them that or letting them know you'd be available for a last minute interview can be helpful for them. I'm going to pause there. Any thoughts or questions before we jump into letters of intent? Okie dokie. So letters of intent, we do want to be careful with these. These are a little more serious. Um, for most professions, we generally are not submitting during the calendar year that you hit submit. There's a little bit of leeway in there, so um, if you're applying to like nursing schools, definitely want to chat with HPA first. But in general, submitting this calendar year is typically too early to send, and they could even end up discarding the email. So if you're waiting for interviews still, sending an update email is typically a stronger strategy. We typically encourage only sending to one school at a time because letter of intent, it's kind of like asking a school to marry you. And in general, frowned upon asking for multiple people to marry you. So we want to plan to only send to one school. It's really best as a strategy when you do it after you've been interviewed and when you've been placed on a wait list or you haven't heard what your status is after interviewing. You typically we're sending it in March through May-ish or so. Some schools appreciate this more than others as well. So while you are at the interview, you could always ask if it's accepted or if it's well received or appreciated. You could ask, current students if they have any information or the admissions folks. But getting more information earlier can be helpful and help decrease the stress in this process. Again, another example. As you can see, it's a little longer than the update email example. I've even seen longer ones where there's a couple of paragraphs. We just, again, want to be pretty clear in our intentions as much as possible because they do typically receive a lot of communication. So we want to, again, make admissions life as easy as possible. So in general, connecting with schools, again, we want to consider events hosted by HPA and others. You could even include it in the secondaries if you haven't submitted it yet. It's a chance to ask good questions or help you stand out. And again, pre-health conference is a really great opportunity to get interviews. I've even had folks get interviews the day of, and they say, "Are you available later after my event?" That's typically for the other health professions, usually not medicine. Or that could lead to that Monday email of getting invited, and that's a super great feeling. Some upcoming events as a highlight here: summer boot camps, conference, and info sessions. Oh, yes, super great question. So how late can we submit our primary application? So going back to what we were talking about earlier, this process is a rolling admissions process. So most health professional schools, while you still see a deadline on their website, they're not usually operating on that deadline. So they're going to still review applications as they receive them. So we would encourage, again, with that mindset of rolling admissions, how can we be early submitting in June or early July? Um, could you apply later? Sure. Just being mindful that the number of seats that they have to offer is going to be going down at that time. And, how do you feel about that process, or how do you feel about submitting your application later? Is that an indicator of, do we look into a future cycle, or are you going to go for it this cycle? At that point, the decision is completely up to you, but just being mindful of how our admissions operating. So maximizing info sessions can be scary, especially in a virtual space, but we do have some really great tips. And how can we help stand out in this process and make their job easier? I know as a speaker, I do generally really appreciate when folks have their cameras on or ask questions in the chat or unmute, etc. That's really helpful. And you guys have been doing really great in the chat. And I would note in the past when I've seen folks with their camera on, I'm just going to be more likely to remember them because usually not a lot of folks do. So it's a really great opportunity, especially at like those info sessions that we'll have across the boot camps or throughout the school year. And we do have more information in that article. Why you should attend boot camps. You can, again, include it in your application. You can meet and learn from schools that can impact your school list, insight into their timeline. So when do they typically invite for interview or send out secondaries, blah, blah, blah. Insight into their interview process. Each med school, health professional, etc. school tends to do the process a little different. So getting that information up front can make things a little less stressful and make preparing easier in this process. And again, you can include it in the secondary if you haven't submitted it yet, or, we can save it for the interview if you learn something fairly significant that you'd like to share about that with them. It's also an opportunity to meet practicing professionals or professional students. It can help shape your goals or understanding of healthcare. Oftentimes you're learning about their perspective as well, and that can oftentimes help strengthen interview answers. And you could also use this as an opportunity to include in an update email as well. Here are some dates for the boot camp, and I just took a picture from our pre-dental boot camp where we see our dentist. He brought in his loops for the students to try out there. So it was a super fun interactive session. And then last but not least, quick highlight for our pre-health conference. Again, largest pre-health event in the nation. October 18th is a Saturday, many months in advance. So if you can come, really great opportunity. We have the QR code up because registration is open. definitely, again, friendly reminder, we want to stay connected. We do have future events like our upcoming interview week in August and our mock interview days in the fall. And we're going to put it in our email newsletter when registration is open. We typically have a mock interview as a part of interview week in August, that last Friday, and we'll typically have a pre-vet and then a general pre-health mock interview days in the fall, usually October, November. And that's usually all of the mock interview sessions that we do as formal events as an opportunity to meet many mock interviewers. So it's a great opportunity to get feedback from a lot of folks. We definitely still do mock interviews at drop-ins and appointments, but this is just a way to get a little bit more variety or some more questions. But the reason why I like to really highlight the mock interviews is because you're also able to usually do it with a buddy. And I get it, you're like, I can do it by myself. That's how it's probably going to be. And we are trying to maximize attendees, and you'd be surprised by how much you might learn from your buddy and how they approach questions as well. And I like to highlight it because we typically only have those sessions in August and then October/November, and then usually we're done for the cycle. So just being mindful of that timeline. These are all the prepared slides that I have. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to hit stop share and stop recording. So thank you, and I hope to see you all in the future.